Hi everyone, it's Beth and I'm here to talk to you about conclusion ideas for your response essay. And I wanted to show you first of all where you can go into our D2L section and open a few different example response essays that are online, so you can look at those. I won't be talking about the Scott Pilgrim versus the World video movie response essay that we looked at in the textbook, but remember we looked at that in class on Monday, and so I encourage you to go back and look at how that writer concluded that particular response essay. But I am going to show you the Black Panther one. I asked you to look at this response essay mostly to look at the two introduction paragraphs, which we looked at in class a little bit on Monday, and then you remember we looked at the topic sentence here as well. But I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom of the essay, and there is a one paragraph conclusion. Oops, went too far. And it's right here. I won't read it to you, but I'll let you know that in the end, after the writer responds to various aspects of the film, namely a couple of things like superheroes and how they're written into the movie, and a couple of other parts of the movie that the writer wanted to respond to. In the end, in the conclusion, the writer does not repeat himself by saying, hey, this was a really great film, because that's overall the review. But he talks about, in the conclusion, how it's such a great film because it leaves the viewer of the film thinking about why race is such an important part of the film, and how, and this last line here that focuses on Black imagination, creation, and liberation is really stressing sort of the promise of the message that the film sends. So, you can try to do that. Let me bring my sticky note backs up. The idea number one is, instead of just repeating what you've already said in your body paragraphs and in your thesis, you could respond by telling how powerful, or the opposite, if you're saying you don't like the essay in the textbook that you are responding to, how powerful or not powerful the essay is in the end. Or you could apply that to the message of the essay. So that's option one, okay? And I got my idea simply by going to an example response essay and looking at that conclusion to see how another writer handled it. Now, of course, that conclusion idea might not work for your essay. If you don't think that fits with what the other things you've been responding to, then let's go back to content. And let's look at another example. We didn't get to look at this example in class, but you'll remember I told you that it was here. So we're using the evaluation chapter in our textbook, but this was another textbook that I've used in my past that had a chapter specifically on response essays. So first I'll point out that it has ideas for how to do your introduction, how to do a summary. It's a very brief synopsis, it says right here. There are all kinds of ideas for body paragraphs here. And then this textbook is a little bit disappointing when it says just sum up your main points, but it does have this part where it says end with a recommendation or a final thought. Again, doesn't have to be repetition from what you've said. So let's put those down. End with a recommendation to the writer, maybe. Maybe this is, if you're writing a response essay that is giving, pointing out some of the weak parts of the essay you didn't like, ending with a recommendation might be an option for you. Either kind of response essay, a positive response or a negative response, or even one where you're in the middle and kind of like some things but kind of dislike some other things, might help you to end with a final thought on the quality of the writing. Another idea, a final thought on what readers can learn from the article or the writer, even if there are parts you, the respondent, didn't like. And I know I gave you 2 other ideas in the blueprints that we wrote on the board in class on Wednesday the 28th, so you might check those out as well. But those are 4 additional ideas, and then I would also encourage you to go to the part of the textbook where you can find information on the conclusion, and I'll challenge you to use your index, which is at the end of the textbook, or even the table of contents. There's a chapter called Cueing the Reader, and there's a section on conclusion ideas there as well. But I'm going to list out 2 other additional ideas that I might try in a response essay. So I'm going to remind you that one of my blueprints from the whiteboard on Wednesday the 28th was one where I was pretending to write about the Stephen King essay. And I was mostly responding to that one positively. So I could, if I wanted to, respond as a writer. So in the conclusion, respond as a learning writer. Sorry, I'm having a couple of typos here. And clarify what you learned from the writer. Okay, so I could respond as a writer and talk about, this might be a way for me to sort of merge restating my main points, the things that I appreciated about the Stephen King article, and also then reflect on how that helped me to understand writing. So that's an option that I think would apply to any of you, because even if you did a negative response or had part of your response essay where you're saying there are a few things I don't like, you could definitely say what you've learned from what not to do. So I think that would be a cool idea. And then another option would be to include your secondary source in the conclusion, whatever kind of secondary source you've decided to use, and then try to make a comment about your primary source. Remember, that's the source from the textbook that you're responding to. So try to make a comment about the primary source based on what you found in your secondary source. Okay, so 6 different ideas here. Respond by reminding the reader what was powerful or not so powerful about the essay overall. Maybe even commenting on the overall message. Remember, we got that idea from the Black Panther source that I shared with you. And with a recommendation to the writer. The third option, final thought on the quality of the writing. Remember, we're talking about conclusion ideas. Your conclusion paragraph can be 1 paragraph, it can be 2. You might even try a combination of these 2 if you wanted to have more than 1 paragraph. Fourth option would be a final thought on what readers can learn from the essay or the writer, even if there are parts you don't like. So that would be a good one if you had, both positive and negative things to say. Respond yourself as a writer. Remember, we had a conversation the first couple of weeks of class about what good writing is. And so maybe you can make a comment about what you've learned both from the writer that he or she does well and what he or she doesn't do so well, and what lessons you take from looking at another writer's piece. And then maybe if you haven't figured out a way to get your secondary source into your introduction or your body paragraphs, maybe including that in the conclusion to make some kind of final comment. But remember what I said in class about making sure there's a connection between the primary source and the secondary source. You'll have to use the secondary source to say something about the primary source that you're concluding on. You're writing a conclusion to say one last thing about the piece that you're responding to. So those are the 6 ideas. I'm going to just let the video run for a couple more seconds so you can see the first 5 ideas or first 4 ideas. You can pause this video right now if you want to take notes. And I'll just scroll down a little bit so you can see the last 2, item 5 and 6. Okay, but before we're done, I want to remind you that there's also, in this online chapter that I've scanned into our D2L section, there's also some information here, 2 more example response essays. So here's another response essay to a film. based on the movie Avatar. And if you scroll down, you see all the body paragraphs there. These are the response paragraphs or the reaction paragraphs, just the textbook using reaction in place of response. Here's a conclusion paragraph where the writer is summing up the points that he or she has made and made a recommendation. So check this one out if you need inspiration for your conclusion. And then there's a second example response essay to a piece of writing. So this one relates more to what you're doing for our response assignment. We're responding to a nonfiction text, and this is a response essay related to a fiction text. You could read the whole thing. I love how the textbook kind of mimics the outlining or the blueprint the blueprints we were creating in class. So you could look at these little notes on the side to see what the author is saying in each of the paragraphs. But if you scroll down to the end, of course, the conclusion is here. And this conclusion, you see, there's another idea right here. This conclusion ends with some final insight on the book. So you could also use that as a seventh conclusion idea, that you could have some thought on, some insight you got from the article that you didn't have before reading it. So there's, again, a seventh idea for a conclusion. And so those are 6 different conclusion ideas. I hope you will use one of them to help you to write a conclusion paragraph that you think will end your response essay in a creative and interesting way. All right, so I'll see you guys in class tomorrow.